Welcome, everybody, to our 13th apologetics study. Our apologetics question number 13, lucky number 13. Here we go. Did you know that in some, this is random, in some buildings, most buildings, they don't have a 13th floor. And in Linden, they do not have 13th Street. It goes 12th Street, 11, 12, BC Avenue, 14th Street. So, but we're not skipping 13 because we don't believe in luck. We believe in the sovereignty of God. So today, our apologetics question is a very relevant question because everyone is mad about this very issue right now in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. And the question today is, should we obey the government? Should we do what they say? Should we just revolt, rise up with pitchforks, and form a coup and take over? What do you guys think? Should we take over the government? Unmute yourself and tell me what you think we should do.
No one likes
Should.
Inslee. No one likes Inslee.
You mean Kim Jong Inslee?
Well, we should. If it doesn't go against God's rules, like it's not like you're not trying to tell us to like kill everyone or
get
something.
this video off YouTube.
Yeah,
Yes.
we're probably gonna get.
It's not like we're just gonna murder.
Yeah. So if
governor.
it doesn't go against God, we should obey our government. And I have a verse to back that up. Huh.
No, I think we should tie her up in a chair and open everything.
Well, thanks for that, everybody. Now, it is very relevant because we have a government like these last couple of months that is getting even more involved in our lives, telling us what we can and can't do because of this virus that's running around. So it's forming more people's opinions because they may believe differently about what should be done. The truth is, with this situation, just a word, no one knows what to do with this thing. It's like a brand new virus. All the data is brand new and confusing as ever. And so a lot of the information is bad. So I'm sure everyone, if they were in charge, we all would have made bad decisions or wrong decisions along the way, and we didn't know how best to combat this. So, but there's plenty of opinions on this subject, and some people are very angry right now at some of the decisions that have been made. So it's a good time to talk about, biblically, what should our response be to government? Should we do what they say? What if they're corrupt? What if they're bad? So some of our challenges. But first, I want to define some of our terms like we like to do so we know what we're talking about. So government, to start off. What is government? Government is the governing body of a nation, state, or community. I thought it was silly that definition on the internet had the word governing in there because that's kind of a no-no to have the word in your definition. So I defined governing, and that's having authority to conduct the policy, actions, and affairs of a state, organization, or people. And then, so that's, making the rules, guiding and instructing the people on what they should do. And really, we also talk about rulers. Maybe we don't really, our government today isn't consisted of rulers today. That sounds like someone who has more authority than our democratic government system. Some people are saying that our government does act like there are rulers or are kings right now. But a ruler is a person exercising government or dominion. And then the last word we want to define is authority. And that is the power or right to give orders, make decisions, and enforce obedience. So all these terms are kind of what we're talking about today. The government that is in place over us. What does God say about that government? What does God say that we should do in response to that government? How should we obey them? Do we have right biblically to disobey them? Where's that line? What should we stand up for? So some of our challenges. The first one I put up there. What if I don't like what the government tells me to do? And, this is our situation we're in right now. Possibly the government is telling us that things to do that we have to do that we don't like or we don't agree with. What if, and there's different variances of not liking something. Maybe at one end, it's like, I don't like that rule. I wish it was different. I wish we could go 5 miles an hour faster on the roads, but that's the law. To the other extreme where I believe that the rules that they're making are based on bad science or untruths, or they have bad information and bad decisions. So I don't like it because it's really bad for lots of reasons, maybe more extreme than I just don't like it. So what do we do in a situation if the government tells you to do something you don't like? Second, what if the government is led by evil people who don't fear God? What if we have evil people in authority over us? Does that give us the right to disobey them? Does that give us the right to overthrow them? Where is the line there, and what are we allowed to do if there's evil people in government where we can say this is an evil person who doesn't fear God? Do we have to respect and obey that person? And then number three, maybe the most extreme level of these questions, what if the government tells me directly to disobey God? What do we do in response to that? If the government is telling us to do something the Bible forbids us to do, or not allowing us to do something the Bible commands us to do, right? Either side of that, what is our response then? So that's some of the challenges we have to that. I'm going to give you a chance to unmute here and give me some of your response. What do you guys think about these questions? Would you have any different ones? Can you unmute yourselves? Oh, okay, try it again. What do you think about these questions?
Yeah, I think there are like things that, especially right now, people are like, I'm asking myself, people are like, I don't like the government, but I'm like, what does the Bible say about it?
Right.
About this? So it's good, and like I get the challenges. Like it's yeah.
Emma, do you have a thought on this?
No, I like the questions.
Okay.
I think they're good.
Anyone would add to this list of challenges? Okay.
Wait, what were they? What if the government doesn't make good decisions? What if the officials are evil and don't fear God? And then there was a third one, right?
What if the government tells me to disobey God?
Oh.
So that's kind of three
Thank you.
different levels. What if I don't like what the government tells me to do? Led by evil people who don't fear God. And what if the government tells me to disobey God? Cool. All right. So those are some of our challenges, and we have a lot of biblical passages today to take a look at. So I need some volunteers for our. Give me a pen, and we'll give you guys. Who wants to read 1 Timothy 2, 1-2? Ellie. Okay, the next one is a longer one. Who wants to read Romans 13, 1-7? Emma. Also an E. Who wants to read? These are two different verses in. They're two chapters apart, but they're one verse each. Daniel 2:22 and 4:32. You can grab them both. Flip over a page. Who wants to do that one? Addison. Okay, Daniel 2:22 and 4:32. So they're close together. Addie. And who wants to do Acts 5:27-29? Trevor. Titus 3:1. Who wants to do that one? Jalen. And then finally, another 7 verse 1, Matthew 22:15-22. I can grab that one. Okay, let's start off with Ellie. How about you read 1 Timothy 2, 1-2.
Okay. First of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way.
Nice. So it starts out, our first verse here is instructing us that we need to be praying for our leaders, for our kings and those in authority. And really the goal here, which kind of gives us a light into the role of government, it helps us, it helps society function and run peacefully. I think we would all agree, some of us might be like anarchists, like, yeah, we should just go crazy. But I think we can all agree having some set of rules brings peace We have police that will arrest people if they break into my house. I don't have to worry. I mean, I lock the doors, but I don't have to like hire a security guard because we have police and security like that. But we should be seeking to live in at peace. So we shouldn't be overthrowing the government for any reason, really. I think as Christians, we should be praying for our leaders is how we start out. So that means, not necessarily, we're going to watch Bill's video later on Governor Inslee. And I remember he says, like, we shouldn't necessarily, we might be compelled to pray against our leaders, but it says pray for our leaders. So we should not be praying just that they get kicked out of office, but we should be praying that they do the best job. We should be praying that they are effective and that they have wisdom and things like that, because it's going to benefit all of us. So praying for our leaders, it doesn't say to pray against our leaders, but to pray for them, to have that attitude of hoping for the best for them, I think is important. Then this is a very important passage, Romans 13. Emma, if you want to read that for us. Romans 13, 1-7. You are muted still.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good judgment, for good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is a servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authority of the ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. Whoops.
Great. Thank you, Emma. So this is a very full passage talking, on a lot of issues that face us regarding government. But first of all, everyone must submit themselves to the governing authorities. And then the key point here is that the governing authorities are put there by God. It says there is no authority except that which God has established. So, kind of to our question, what if the government is led by evil people who do God? It's not necessarily, welcome Zeta, she's coming in. It's not necessarily, a matter of if they fear God or not. It is a matter of everyone in authority is there under God's authority. So they are limited in their authority by God. And they can't they can't act necessarily in authority without, God's will involved. I don't think he wouldn't be making them do evil things, but God always has purposes for those he's put in authority, and he can remove people from authority if it's his will. So understanding that we need to respect and submit to governing authorities because that authority is under God. Now, there's our other question, what if the government tells you to disobey God, is also reflected in here because God is the higher authority. So we're starting to see that we need to obey our authorities, but there is a line here where if the government is telling us to disobey God, God is the higher authority. It's kind of like if your sister tells you to do something, and even if it's your older sister might have or brother might have some bit of authority over you because they're older and maybe sometimes they're in charge. But who's the highest authority in your home? It's your parents. And so just because your sibling tells you to do something, they may have some bit of authority, but there's a higher authority, right? So that's kind of how it is with the rulers God put in place. It talks a lot more about, do you want to be free from fear from the one who's in authority? Then do what is right, obey the law, and you won't have to live in fear of those who are in authority, for he is God's servant. Bill brings this out too later in the video, but it's so incredible that the Bible calls people in government and authority God's servants. Like normally we'd call Christians in like ministry roles God's servants, but this title is given to rulers, governing authorities. And and it continues to tell us to submit to authorities, because not just because of punishment, but also because of conscience, to do what's right and pay your taxes. Again, the authorities are God's servant. So that passage really answers a lot of it, and it's really important that we understand the roles of authorities and that God has put those authorities in place. So it does speak a lot to our issue. I want to look also at Daniel. And Addison, you had 2 verses in Daniel, and I think what we're seeing here is a kind of a pattern biblically. We can look at now at the Old Testament too, what that policy was, but understanding that in the New Testament times, the government of the day was very evil. I mean, it was evil and oppressive. Like, it was a foreign government at this time. In Jesus' time, the Romans had come, and after the Greeks had already kind of done the same thing, the Romans were in charge. A foreign country was occupying the land of Israel, taxing them, ruling over them. That's like when Jesus is being crucified, he's brought to Herod, who's like the Jewish puppet king, but there's also Pilate, who's the Roman governor. There's multiple authorities going on, and there's multiple layers of government, and you have this outside nation. Rome is from Italy, right? And Israel's, across the Mediterranean. They've conquered most of the known world, and they're taxing it and policing it with Roman soldiers and stuff. So, like, we pay taxes today, and those taxes, maybe they're misused, and we might have opinions on how our taxes are used, but our taxes stay in America for the most part. And, some military that goes around the world, but generally it's for America. The taxes we pay, like, go to our schools and our roads and things like that. And we have problems with taxes. Now, imagine if there was another country, man, if Canada had taken over America. That'll never happen. But if Canada had taken over America and was taxing us and using the money to make Canadian roads and Canadian schools, that would feel really awful, and we'd really be upset at the taxes. That was the case for the people in Jesus' day. And next, we're going to look at Daniel. And Daniel was basically a captive of a conquering nation in a foreign nation. So let's look at Daniel, Addison, and see what Daniel says about what we should do with government and rulers. And remember, he's in Babylon and has been conquered and kidnapped, basically captive and taken to Babylon. So he's under a totally different government system. He's in a foreign country, and so he's under this new ruler. And let's see what he says about government. So 2:22 first, and then 4:32.
Okay. 2:22. Okay. He reveals deep hidden things, and he knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells within him.
Maybe I wrote the verse down. That doesn't sound right. Okay, read 4:32 and see what that says.
4:32. I think this one is wrong too. And you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be at the beasts of the field. And you shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men.
Did I write down the verses wrong? Okay, it's 4:22.
4:22. Okay.
No, it's not.
No.
Okay, I wrote down the verses wrong. I don't have time to look them up. But basically, think about Daniel in the time of his ruling and the kings and rulers over him. He basically has some of the same message, like the government is in charge, the government is ruling. And in the middle of that story, in chapter 3, we have the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And it's interesting because basically, I wanted to show you that, I forget, I don't have time to look up the verses, but contrasted between the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which, if you don't know, that what happens there is they're told to bow down and worship an idol from their king, and they stand up and disobey. So that is a point, of number 3. What if the government tells me to disobey God? They're not supposed to disobey God. Also, the government later tells Daniel he's not allowed to pray to his God. And he disobeys the government at that time. So Daniel reaffirms some of the same principles we're talking about how the government is an authority, how the king is the ruler under God, but then also doesn't cross the line of disobeying God because the king tells him to. He understands that the king is not higher authority than God and obeys God in those circumstances. I'm really sorry about not having those right verses. I'm confused now, but
Yeah, I can read the last one, Matthew 22 instead.
okay, sounds great. Now, okay, I want to show a video now. We'll go to video of what our friend, the 1 minute apologist, answering the question, what is the role of government?
Welcome to the 1 Minute Apologist. We interview the world's leading apologists to provide credible answers to curious questions. Biblically speaking, Dr. Geisler, what is the role of government?
Well, it's described in Romans 13, 1 through 7. The role of government is God has ordained it to resist evil, to promote good, to keep structure in society. Nobody would like to live in a society where there was no law. A monarchy is better than an anarchy. Anarchy is just horrible. During the riots, the Los Angeles riots, that's an anarchy. Everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. There's no structure, there's no law at all. So God placed it there to resist evil, to promote good, so that we could live peaceful and happy lives. As it says in Timothy, pray for government, good government, so we live peaceful and godly lives in this world. 1 Peter 2 has the same thing. Submit to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, because it's good to have a structure in which to live. The only exceptions to that are when government takes the place of God. When government takes its place under God, we should obey it. When government takes the place of God, like Daniel, the 3 Hebrew children, then we disobey it. But we disobey it only because it's replacing God, and we can't worship what's a creature.
So we have there some of the same things we've talked about. He brought up Daniel too. When the government replaces God, I kind of liked how he said that, when it goes above God's authority, when it tries to take the role of God and tells us how to worship or how to obey God, we need to obey God over the government. Okay, Trevor, you have Acts 5:27. Here's another example of disobeying the government. Can you read that for us, Trevor?
Mm-hmm. And when they had brought them, they set them before the council, and the high priest asked them, saying, "We strictly charge you not to teach in this name. And behold, ye have filled Jerusalem with your teaching, and intend to bring this man's blood upon us." But Peter and the apostles answered and said, "We must obey God rather than men."
Boom. So we have a very clear instruction from the ruling authorities over Peter and John, and they instruct them not to talk about Jesus, not to speak in Jesus' name. Now, we've been commanded by Jesus to preach the gospel, to make disciples. And so when the government tells us we're not allowed to talk about Jesus, we have a higher authority that says, no, you're supposed to talk about Jesus. And so what they say, we must obey God rather than men. Because government at that time, their ruling authorities crossed the line of telling them to disobey God, and they refused. And actually, they get put in prison, and then they get released. I think that's the earthquake one. And God takes care of them in their civil disobedience of the law, which is awesome. But okay, Jalen, can you read Titus 3:1 to us?
There we go. Can you hear me? All right?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. Here's Titus 3:1. Remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready to do whatever is good.
Yeah. To be obedient to our authorities to do whatever is good. So just another reminder, another part in Scripture to obey and to do what is good. So we have these, there is a contrast here, right? It's not just obey in all circumstances. There is a line where we've seen a couple occasions where people disobey, but it's that line where it takes a higher authority than God. Okay, Addison, you were going to take the Matthew passage, which is another, it's Jesus's instruction, and this is when he's being challenged on this very issue. Remember, the current ruling system is Caesar and the Romans, so they challenged Jesus on this question. Would have been a very controversial thing at the time for the people. Go ahead, Addie.
Okay, paying taxes to Caesar. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him with his words. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us, then, what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus, aware of the malice, said, Why, put me to the test, you hypocrites. Show me the coin for the tax. And then they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, Whose likeness is the inscription on this? And they said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away.
Nice, thank you. So they tried to trick Jesus with this very question, essentially. Should we pay taxes to Caesar? And Caesar, or should we give the money to God? And kind of like a trick question. They asked him this knowing that either answer he said, if he said pay taxes to Caesar, all the citizens, who's Whale Nose now? Who changed their name to Whale Nose? You put a good question or a good comment in chat. I'm glad the government in Bible times is different than it is now. Yeah, we're not being oppressed. That must be Aiden. And
No, it's Trevor.
It's Trevor. We're not being oppressed, and we're not being occupied by a foreign government. You're right. I'm glad too that it's different. And the cool thing that Jesus says here is he kind of skirts this difficult question, because if he would have said no, he should give the money to God, then the Roman soldiers might have arrested him for stirring up the crowd against Rome. So this is what they wanted to happen to Jesus, is for him to not have a good answer. But he pulls out the coin, says, whose face is on this coin? And of course it's Caesar, because it's the Roman coin. He says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God God's what is God's. Like this perfect answer that, just says, there's ruling authorities and they have the authority, and God is a higher authority, and give to God what is his, and give to Caesar what is his. Do what is right under the government authorities. Now, one thing I do want to talk about too is our specific form of government, because it is different than they had in biblical times. We don't have an oppressive government. In some biblical times they had they had a monarchy with a king, and other times they kind of just had this like spiritual government that was very much tied to, like, the priests were kind of the rulers, or like Moses, and the worship system was also tied in the government. Today we don't have that, but we also don't have a king, and we also don't have an oppressive government like from a foreign nation taking us over. If you have a question, Zeta, type it in. And then we have this democracy, or like a republic, constitutional republic, democratic republic, different ways to call. We're not a straight democracy. We can't just vote anything into existence, because we have this constitution and it gives us rights. So constitutional republic or democratic republic are different ways to say what our government system is. And we have a government system that says we have a right to like the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. It tells us our rights to speak out what we think is wrong. And we have a right to religion. We have a right to freedom of speech. All this is within the First Amendment. We have a right to assemble. We have a right to overthrow an oppressive government. Like, we came out of being ruled by England, where we had this oppressive king that was taxing us unfairly and doing things unfairly. So that's the roots of our government system. And government has changed a lot over time, but we still have this document, the Constitution. So it's almost like as a Christian viewpoint, it's okay to, stand up for our rights underneath the government because we've been given that right by the government. And that's the authority that has been given to us, is the right to, we can vote for what is right. We can stand up for what is right. Like especially some very clear issues for Christians, at least most Christians, like abortion, something that's legal and we see it as an injustice. We should be standing up against those things that are injustices because our government has given us that right to stand up against. And Zeta's question is, what does the Bible say about protesting? Although the Bible says to obey the authorities God has put into place unless they go against what God says, what are we supposed to do when the government goes too far? It's a great question. And so what I'm talking about here is our government that God has given us and put in authority our government has given us the rights to protest, to stand up for what is right. Now, we shouldn't be violent or crazy about it. We shouldn't try to overthrow the rulers because just we don't like them. But when things are wrong, we have every right to protest. We have every right to speak out and speak for what is right. We have every right. The government that God has put in place has given us the right to vote and to vote for what is right. So I believe that not everyone believes this. I was just reading a thing from a pastor that says Christians shouldn't protest. But I believe within the governing authorities that we've been given those rights to protest. We've been given those rights to vote for what is right. So we can. If the government was fully oppressive, it's biblically speaking, we need to be even more submissive than we would in a government that says we can stand up against it. So that's all very interesting, and it puts us in an interesting spot because we have this government that has given us these type of rights to vote, to have an opinion, to have our feelings, what is right and wrong. Ellie says, and we protest for pro-life things, and that is good. So protesting there is good. Yeah, I think especially against things that are injustices, we have every right to speak out, and we have every right to vote, definitely, for what we think is right. Great questions, and it's very interesting. Now, the Constitution is not the Bible either, right? The Constitution, some people have think that God gave us the Constitution. God, like all government, is in control of government and authorities, and I feel blessed to live in the nation that we live in and have the freedoms we have. But if that changes, we are still under the government that we're in. If we're in a different country, we'd have a different government and a different government to submit to that God has put in place, God has allowed under. So I want to watch Bill's video. He just made this earlier this week. It's it's called Governor Inslee, and he brings up some of the same verses we've looked up and speaks to it. But let's watch that together. It's a little bit longer than most of the videos I show, but it's Bill, so that should be fun. He's been making these videos every day, and they're really good. Let's watch it together.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to Tuesday's Coffee Talk for the Daily Grind called Governor Inslee. This morning's Coffee Talk title may give you the impression that this is going to be about politics. It won't be. There is enough opinion out there on both, all, and every side of this issue to choke a camel. And the battle lines, even in the body of Christ, sadly, have been drawn. So I hardly want to add to all of that. Nor will this talk be my perspective on how this virus, bad flu, major plague, hoax, or whatever description you prefer should be handled. Since there is enough information, misinformation, and disinformation out there, I want to focus on what I know to be true about Governor Inslee. Now, I don't know him personally, but I know these to be true. Number one, Governor Inslee needs our prayers. You may be thinking, boy, does that man need prayer. But it's easy to avoid. If we agree with politicians, many of us may not pray that much because we feel at ease with how things are going. If we disagree with them, we may have negative feelings, and many of us may find it hard to pray for them. Against them, yes, but not for them. A lot of people in authority wouldn't mind prayer, though, even if they aren't believers. It's not easy to run a government when about half the people in your care would replace you in a heartbeat if they could. 1 Timothy 2:1 and 2 says this, I urge then, first of all, that requests, prayers, and intercessions and thanksgiving be made for everyone, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. It is interesting that besides our prayers that God will give those in authority wisdom in decision making, that God will help them, we are called to give thanks for them and for their work. The hope of this high priority of prayer for those in authority is that we can live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. We should pray for President Trump and Governor Inslee so that we could peacefully go about our lives as followers of Christ and spread his word. Number 2, Governor Inslee was put in his position by God. Romans 13:1 says this, everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. The reason for the command is stunning. The authorities that exist have been established by God. In our country, with the right to vote, we can mistakenly believe that we decide all of these matters, that we put people in office and vote them out. But ultimately, as it is stated in Daniel 4:32, and I quote, the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men, and he gives them to anyone he wishes. And as it says in Daniel 2:22, he changes times and seasons, he deposes kings, and raises up others. There was a bumper sticker that circulated years ago regarding the president. It said, he is not my president. I haven't seen one yet about Governor Inslee, but I bet it's coming. Interesting, and maybe shocking to us, if there was such a sticker, God's bumper sticker would modify it and say this, he may not be your governor, but he is mine for now. And 3, Governor Inslee is God's servant. Referring to those in authority in Romans 13:4, and no endorsement of them, Paul said this, for he is God's servant. And verse 6 adds, this is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. We think of pastors and missionaries as servants of God, but we do not tend to think of people in authority and in public service like that. We think of them as politicians, yet God considers them his servants as well, to help order society, to do his work, to reward those who do good and to punish those who do evil. Now, I don't know Governor Inslee's favorite restaurant, where he lives, or how many grandchildren he has. But I do know he needs our prayers. I do know that he is our governor by God's choice until God decides differently, and I do know he is called God's servant in God's word. Tomorrow I'll be back again with another coffee talk for the daily grind. I hope you'll come along. But if you don't, in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
You said it. You were right, Aiden. In case I don't see you. So Bill went over all those verses I got from him that we looked at, and he went over some of those same concepts, and that is true. You know, we need to be praying for our leaders and obeying them. They're under God's authority, and he's placed them there. So obeying our leaders, it's kind of like, you know, the verses about obey your parents for this is right in the Lord. God is giving you your parents, so it's like an extension. By obeying your parents, you're obeying God, and similar for the leaders. Now, all that together, we have verses that tell us to obey the authorities, verses to tell us that they are under God's authority, so obeying the authorities is obeying God. But we also looked at 2 passages where the authorities were disobeyed. We had we had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego disobeying King Nebuchadnezzar and not bowing down to the statue idol. And we had Peter and John continuing to preach the word. So here's our short answer and our thoughts to our challenges. Should we obey the government, the governing authorities? The short answer is yes. Yes, we should obey the governing authorities. They are under, what I have down here is they are under God's authority, even if they don't fear him. So, under our question, what if they're led by evil people? They're still under God's authority. Like like Bill says, even though we have the right to vote, God is still in control, and we didn't put those people there, even though we do have a say and we should vote for what's right and what we think is best. God is still in control. So even if they don't fear him, they're placed there by God. So that just because our governor, if you want to say, or our president or the king or whoever is in our authority is an evil person, doesn't give us the right to just blatantly disobey just because they're evil. They're under God's authority. So yes, short answer, yes, they are under God's authority, even if they don't fear him, even if they don't acknowledge that they're under God's authority. God is the higher authority, though, okay? So here's kind of like the clause. God is the higher authority, though. So if the two authorities conflict, right, if they're telling us to do two different things, we must obey God because God is the highest authority. And then, so if the two authorities conflict, we must obey God. So that's our line, right? What if I don't like what the government is telling me to do? The government is in authority. It's been placed there by God. We're supposed to live at peace. What if the government is being led by evil people? Still, that governor, that king, that president, whoever it is, has been placed there by God, and we need to respect that authority. Now, the one thing, if the government tells you to disobey God, God is the higher authority, and the government should be disobeyed, and God should be obeyed. And finally, that last part, which is just, gives us the right attitude to remember, to pray for our leaders and do what we can to influence for good. So that's kind of bringing out, we live in this wonderful, crazy at times, difficult to figure out democracy where we have more rights, but we need to pray and do good when we can and influence good when we have the opportunity. So we shouldn't just give up on voting, I think, because we do have an opportunity to vote for what's right and vote for what's good and speak up for what's good, and especially to speak up for injustice and those who are innocent and can't speak up for themselves, like the unborn. Our last section, I think we forgot to do this last time, but how do we talk to our friends about this? What if our friends, this is an important time. I've got tons of friends on the internet posting all kinds of things. How do we talk to our friends about this? But I want to hear from you guys. How do you talk to a friend about this? If your friend says, but I don't want to obey Governor Inslee, and I think he's just crazy and is bad information. Like, what do you say to a friend like that? And how do you handle that? Any thoughts?
You could say that God is a higher authority and that the Bible says to obey the government. But if the government goes against God, you need to obey God.
Yep. So we should be in obedience. Yeah. Unless it's against God. Anything
And that
else?
we should pray for them and not pray against them, and pray for them to make the right decisions, because we know it's hard for everyone, not just us. It's hard for the governor to make decisions like that too.
Yeah.
So
For sure. I think if anyone was governor right now, half the people would hate him and half the people would like him too. When you're in those type of leadership positions, there's no perfect answer to so many of the decisions they have to make. So yeah, praying for them to have wisdom. It's going to benefit all of us, right? Anybody else? Any thoughts on this? Any other questions on this? Okay. It's not a perfect answer. It's not a black and white answer. There are times to disobey the government, but in general, the government has been placed in authority. I want to add one more thing that I thought of today. My friend who lives in China was telling me that the Communist Party actually in philosophy supports Christianity because Christianity's ethics are to submit to the government. So they're like, some hardcore communists are like, Christianity's fine. It tells them to submit to the government. So their religion tells them to follow the government. So we're cool with it. But I mean, that's not all the Communist Party, but it's an interesting take that is the loudest instruction on government in the Bible is not to overthrow. We shouldn't be anarchists and try to just take over. We should live at peace and do our best to respect the authority that God has put in place. So thanks everybody. That was a good one, interesting one, very relevant. Appreciate it. Bye.